Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we really try to unpack complex ideas, find those little nuggets of knowledge, those insights that can actually make a difference in how we think, maybe even how we live. And today we're diving into something that sounds, well, almost ridiculously simple, but it turns out it's incredibly challenging in our modern world. We're talking about doing nothing.
That's right. It sounds easy, doesn't it? But as Jenny Odell and her brilliant work is really the core of our deep dive today, as she puts it, nothing is harder to do than nothing. We're going to explore exactly why that is, why this, seemingly counterintuitive idea is actually potentially a remarkably powerful plan of action, especially now, right, when our value feels so relentlessly tied to our productivity.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to really get under the skin of this paradox. We want to explore how our attention is constantly being captured, almost commodified. We'll uncover some surprising ideas about how we can re-engage with what genuinely matters to us. And then crucially, the goal is to show you how you might apply these lessons, maybe directly to your daily life.
Immediately, even.
Immediately, to hopefully benefit from, I don't know, a renewed sense of purpose, maybe connection.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Okay, so let's really unpack this first part, that feeling. Do you ever get that unsettling, almost nervous sensation, like being constantly overstimulated and maybe unable to really sustain a train of thought for more than a few minutes?
Oh, absolutely. I think most people recognize that feeling. It's like this low-level hum of anxiety or restlessness in the background.
Exactly. It feels like a constant background hum. But Odell suggests it's more than just a feeling, right? It's a kind of signal.
It is. It points to this uncomfortable truth that maybe we don't always want to look at, that a huge chunk of what we consider our free time isn't actually free at all.
How so?
Well, it's being, as she says, captured, optimized, or appropriated as a financial resource, often by the very technologies we use every single day.
Okay, let's dig into that. Because when you think about the design of these platforms, they want you engaged, right? Constantly scrolling, clicking, liking.
Right. Every interaction is data. And we internalize this.
Yeah.
We start evaluating ourselves numerically. How many likes, how many followers, how many connections. It's almost like we're interacting with these algorithmic versions of each other, filtered, curated.
And building our personal brands in the process.
Constantly building and maintaining these personal brands. And maybe there's a kind of satisfaction in that. For some, like an engineer might feel streamlining something, making experience measurable, marketable.
But that feeling, that nervous, overstimulated feeling, it doesn't really go away, does it?
It persists, like a quiet alarm bell, as you said.
Yeah.
It suggests something important is missing.
So it makes you wonder, if we're so focused on curating our lives, presenting this optimized version, what are we actually missing out on in the living of them?
Well, that's the urgency Odell talks about. That feeling isn't just uncomfortable. It's urgent because, she argues, much of what genuinely gives life meaning. Things like, accidents, unexpected interruptions, those serendipitous encounters.
Accidents.
Exactly. What she calls off time. These are precisely the things that a purely mechanistic view of experience, the one driven by this constant capture and optimization, tries to eliminate. It wants predictability, efficiency.
Because those things are messy, unpredictable. They don't fit neatly into a data set or a productivity metric.
Precisely. So when we're perpetually focused on building and maintaining these personal brands, we often do it at the expense of genuine, unscripted experience. We're curators, not always participants. The spontaneity, the inefficiency of real life. It gets paved over by the demand for constant content, constant performance.
So you mentioned these platforms acting like dams, like Facebook, Instagram. They act like dams that capitalize on our natural interest in others and an ageless need for community.
Hijacking and frustrating our most innate desires and profiting from them. That's Odell's powerful phrase.
Hijacking, that's a strong word. How deliberate do you think this design is? Is it just an accidental byproduct of chasing engagement, or is it more strategic?
Odell makes a very compelling case that it's far from accidental. The dam metaphor is really key. Think about what a dam does. It blocks a natural flow, redirects it, contains it for a specific purpose.
Right, to generate power or store water.
Exactly. And our natural human need for community, for belonging, for genuine connection that's a powerful current, these platforms essentially build a dam across that current. They divert it into their own reservoirs, their walled gardens.
Where they can control it.
And monetize it. Through ads, data collection, targeted content, they promise connection, but often deliver a kind of simulated, optimized version. which can paradoxically leave us feeling less truly connected, maybe even more isolated. It's a subtle erosion of something fundamental.
So this damming of attention, this hijacking of desire, it seems like it leads to a really fundamental erosion of things we perhaps took for granted about being human. What does Odell propose as a way to reframe these lost elements?
This is where it gets really radical. She argues that things like solitude, real solitude, not just being alone with your phone,
Right.
the deep practice of observation, just paying attention to the world around you, and simple conviviality, just being with people in an unpressured way, not networking, not creating content. These things shouldn't be seen as just like desirable outcomes or luxuries for the few who can afford a fancy digital detox retreat.
Which often just repackages them for productivity anyway.
Exactly. Instead, she posits them as inalienable rights belonging to anyone lucky enough to be alive.
Inalienable rights. Wow.
It's a powerful statement. It suggests that access to these basic human experiences, quiet time for reflection, the chance to simply observe, unburdened present with others, is as fundamental as, say, freedom of speech. It challenges the whole idea that these are optional extras.
That's a huge reframe. But if they are rights, why do they feel so inaccessible? Like a luxury item for so many people caught up in the daily grind. Does that make doing nothing less about personal wellness and more about resistance?
It absolutely does, and that's the real irony here. Given all this pressure, all this capture, doing nothing, in Odell's view, isn't about laziness. It's not about escaping work just so you can come back refreshed and be more productive for the system. That's the trap many wellness trends fall into.
Right, optimizing your downtime for better uptime.
Exactly. Instead, doing nothing becomes a profound questioning of what we currently perceive as productive in the first place. It asks us to challenge the framework that dictates our worth, the one that usually equates productivity solely with economic output, with measurable results.
So the insight isn't just changing your habits, it's changing your whole definition of value.
Precisely. True liberation, she suggests, might lie in recognizing that what society often labels unproductive, that quiet observation, that unstructured time, the refusal to constantly perform, is precisely where our deepest purpose, connection, and even our resistance might actually be found.
Okay, so this nothing is only nothing from the point of view of capitalist productivity. If it's not laziness, what does it actually involve? How does Odell break down this seemingly passive act? Is it just sitting still?
No, she describes it as a series of quite active, intentional movements or shifts. It's a refusal, fundamentally, of that dominant value system. And it happens in 3 stages, roughly.
Okay.
First, there's a dropping out. Now, this isn't necessarily packing your bags and heading for the hills, though it echoes the 1960s counterculture in some way.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
Kind of, but recontextualized for our digital age. It's more about an intentional disengagement, a pulling back of your attention and energy from those prevailing narratives of productivity, constant connection, constant optimization.
So less a physical escape, more a psychological or energetic withdrawal.
Exactly. Disinvesting. Then second, there's a lateral movement outward. This is about shifting your focus away from the abstract, often algorithmically mediated world of screens and feeds, towards the real things, the real people that are physically around you, moving from the global, the distant, the digital, back to the local, the tangible, the immediate.
Getting grounded.
Getting grounded. And that leads to the third movement, which is maybe the most profound, a movement downward into place. This means engaging more deeply, more attentively with where you are right here, right now, fostering a sense of rootedness, of presence in your actual physical environment.
And Odell warns that technology often works against this, right?
Absolutely. She says much of our current tech is designed to deliberately create false targets for self-reflection, curiosity, and a desire to belong to a community. They mimic the real thing, they offer substitutes, but ultimately, they serve to keep you within their digital walls, focused on their targets, not your own sense of place.
That makes a lot of sense. So, bringing this back to you, the listener, how might you apply these 3 movements in your own life? Odell poses some really provocative questions here, like, what would back to the land mean if the land was simply where you are right now?
Yeah, it challenges that whole idea that escape has to mean going somewhere remote, off-grid. What if that deep grounding connection could be found right in your own neighborhood, your local park, your street, maybe even just looking out your window with fresh eyes?
And this one I love. What if augmented reality could simply mean putting your phone down?
Right. Instead of needing some fancy digital overlay projected onto the world, what if the real augmented reality is just truly seeing, truly engaging with the physical reality that's already right there in front of you, noticing the details, the textures, the connections you usually miss.
Exactly. What, or maybe, who is right in front of you when you finally look up, when you finally put the phone down? These questions are invitations, really. Invitations to rethink your immediate surroundings, the people sharing that space with you, as the primary place for genuine engagement, for real connection. Maybe the first step isn't downloading a new app, but just choosing to be present where you already are. It's easy to talk about this stuff in theory, but where do we actually see this idea of resistance in place playing out? Odell offers a fantastic, literally rooted example right here in the Bay Area, actually. The story of Old Survivor.
Ah, yes, the redwood in Oakland. It's an amazing story. This tree, it's about 500 years old, an old-growth redwood hidden away in the hills.
And what's striking is that it's surprisingly, well, short and kind of gnarled compared to the image we have of those towering ancient redwoods. And it's really hard to get to.
Exactly. And that's the key to its survival. It literally stood there while massive logging operations after the gold rush cleared almost all the other ancient redwoods in the East Bay Hills. The demand for timber was just insatiable back then. These huge trees were seen purely as financial resources.
But Old Survivor remained. Why?
It survived, Odell explains, largely because it appeared useless to the loggers as timber. Its twisted shape, those deep gnarls, the difficult, steep, rocky slope it grew on. It just wasn't worth the immense effort and cost to cut it down and haul it out.
So it wasn't economically viable to harvest.
Right. It was seen as a runt compared to its majestic neighbors, a kind of anomaly in this landscape being rapidly transformed by industry. Its perceived lack of conventional utility, its uselessness for timber, paradoxically became its protection.
That's incredible. Its worthlessness in that specific frame saved it. It reminds me so much of that ancient story from Zhuangzi, the Chinese philosopher, the one called the useless tree.
Oh yeah, the gnarled oak.
Right. A carpenter comes across this huge, ancient, impressive-looking oak, but he just walks right past it, declares it a worthless tree.
Because its branches are too twisted for beams, the trunk too gnarled for planks. He's only seeing it through that narrow lens of, what can I make out of this? What's its economic value?
And then the tree appears to him in a dream, right? And challenges him.
It does. It asks, essentially, are you comparing me to those useful trees? The tree points out that fruit trees get stripped bare, their branches broken, and timber trees get felled precisely because they're useful in that human-defined way.
While its own uselessness
has been its strategy. It allowed it to grow large, provide vast shade, shelter for animals, rest for travelers. The tree completely rejects the human distinction between usefulness and worth. It questions the whole frame of things condemning things, as Zhuangzi puts it. It suggests that what we dismiss as useless might actually be essential to a larger, more ecological, maybe even a more truly human way of looking at value. Things have intrinsic worth, not just instrumental worth.
So if we take that metaphor, this usefulness of uselessness, it becomes a way to challenge a social world that's often, let's face it, full of hypocrisy and illogic, where everything seems to need a purpose, a function, or it gets discarded.
Right. And for someone trying to live an ethical life, trying to resist that dominant pressure, Odell suggests that maybe the logic needs to be flipped. Good would be bad, up would be down, productivity would be destruction, and indeed uselessness would be useful. Old Survivor, just by standing there, embodies this upside-down logic.
It perfectly illustrates what Odell calls resistance in place, making yourself into a shape that can't be easily co-opted.
Exactly, a shape that cannot so easily be appropriated by a capitalist value system. It means actively refusing that conventional frame where your value is solely determined by your productivity, your career trajectory, your hustle as an individual entrepreneur.
And instead, embracing.
Embracing, as she says, fuzzier or blobbier ideas. These aren't neat, quantifiable concepts, things like seeing maintenance as a crucial form of productivity. The ongoing work of sustaining, repairing, caring for things in relationships, not just creating new stuff.
Which is so often invisible or undervalued.
Totally. It also means recognizing the profound importance of nonverbal communication. All those subtle cues, the unspoken understandings, the stuff that gets stripped away in purely digital interactions. And maybe most fundamentally, it means viewing the mere experience of life in all its complexity as the highest goal in itself, not just a means to an end.
So celebrating a self that's maybe messy, changeable.
Yes. A self that changes over time, that exceeds algorithmic description. A self whose identity isn't rigidly bounded by the individual skin, but is porous, connected, influenced by others, and the environment.
This sounds appealing, but let's be honest, it isn't easy, is it? Trying to apply this in daily life, trying to resist that constant pressure to be productive, to be useful in conventional terms. Odell says it can feel like wearing the wrong outfit to a place with a dress code.
Huh. That's a great analogy. It's like showing up to a formal event in beachwear. There's this friction, this social discomfort. It takes real commitment, real discipline, sheer willpower sometimes, to resist that pervasive mindset, to actually do nothing when everything is screaming at you to do something. Have you felt that friction yourself, trying to disconnect even for a bit?
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply ingrained, that pull to check your phone when you have 2 seconds of downtime or your mind instantly jumping to your to-do list the moment you sit down to relax. It's a reflex almost, reinforced constantly by everything around us.
It is. And think about it. How many truly meaningful moments in your own life? Maybe a long, aimless walk where you weren't trying to get anywhere specific, or a deep conversation with a friend that just wandered, or simply sitting and watching the world go by. How often are those moments framed as unproductive by conventional standards?
Almost always, they don't tick a box.
Right. Consider John Muir again. We mentioned his accident.
Sig-
Before he became the famous naturalist, he was all about productivity. Pottering in a wagon factory, yes, but also inventing things like a self-setting sawmill, an automatic lumber feeder, even a study desk that was also an alarm clock and timer. He was obsessed with efficiency.
Wow, I didn't know about the desk clock.
Yeah. But then, that accident. Being confined to a dark room for 6 weeks, temporarily blind, it forced a total reevaluation. He realized, in his words, that life was too brief and uncertain, total waste upon belts and saws. He consciously turned away from that model of productivity to dedicate his life to studying the natural world. It was this profound, albeit involuntary, resistance in place.
It highlights how sometimes the biggest shifts don't come from adding more, but from being forced to stop, allowing something new to emerge.
Exactly. So, for you, the listener, how might you cultivate small moments of uselessness in your day? What are those activities or non-activities that bring you meaning or connection or just simple presence, but might not show up on any standard productivity tracker? Maybe the real work isn't always about output, but about reclaiming our attention, our presence.
Okay, so the first half of doing nothing is this act of disengaging, pulling back from the attention economy. But what comes next? Is that it? Or does Odell propose something we should re-engage with?
That's the absolutely crucial second half. Disengagement is step one, yes. But the other, equally vital part is about actively re-engaging with something incredibly fundamental, time and space itself, the actual world around us.
How does that work?
It's what becomes possible when we intentionally reroute and deepen our attention. When we pull it away from the abstract, the digital, the constant stream of information, and deliberately redirect it back to the concrete reality right here, right now.
And this leads to what Odell calls a new kind of placefulness. What does that actually mean, and why is it important?
Placefulness is about developing a heightened sensitivity and maybe even a sense of responsibility to the unique context of where you are. This includes its history, what happened here, the stories embedded in the buildings, the land, the names.
And its ecology, too.
And its ecology, exactly.
Yeah.
Who and what lives or lived here, the plants, the animals, the water systems, the whole web of life that defines a place. Cultivating this placefulness forces us to step back from that narrow capitalist logic of, what can this do for me? Or how productive is this?
And ask different questions.
Yes, ask those fundamental questions. Productivity that produces what? Successful in what way? And for whom? It pushes us to look beyond purely teleological goals. Telos being that ultimate purpose or predetermined endpoint. It encourages us to recognize that some moments, some places, some beings are valuable simply for being, not for what they produce or enable. Appreciating intrinsic value over purely instrumental value.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And speaking of places, it feels like some physical spaces are almost designed to help us do this, to hold our attention differently. You mentioned the Morecambe Amphitheater of Roses in Oakland, the Rose Garden.
Ah, yes, it's a wonderful example.
It's not just a flat grid of roses. It's built into this natural bowl in a hill, right? With all these winding paths, stairs, little hidden benches.
It absolutely wants you to stay a while, as Odell puts it. The design itself encourages slow movement, lingering, exploration. You see people there moving really slowly, just absorbing it. And yes, they literally stop and smell the roses. It's a perfect example of what she calls attention-holding architecture.
It draws you in, holds you there.
Exactly. Labyrinths do something similar. They create this dense infolding of attention. You're not rushing to get to the center. The journey along the path is the point. It allows you to inhabit the space deeply, quieting the mind.
And this isn't just about grand structures, is it? Odell mentions other examples.
No, not at all. Think about Eleanor Coppola's Windows project back in '73. She just created a map listing specific ordinary windows around San Francisco. The window frames were the art, and whatever unfolded behind them, the everyday life, were the stories that crawled in. It was about framing existing reality, inviting deep attention to the mundane.
Or that event, applause encouraged.
Right, Scott Pollett's event in San Diego. People just gathered on a cliff to watch and applaud the sunset. It framed this natural daily event as something worthy of focused, shared attention, turning something fleeting into a communal ritual, simply by deciding to pay attention together.
So thinking about application here for you, the listener, can you identify, or maybe even consciously create, some kind of attention-holding architecture in your own life?
It doesn't have to be grand.
Not at all. It could be that quiet corner in your home where you always read, or a specific bench on your usual walking path that invites you to pause. Maybe even a simple routine, like the way you mindfully make your morning coffee or tea, that encourages slowness and observation. Where do you find yourself naturally lingering rather than rushing through? What spaces or routines hold your attention?
And this infolding of attention, it doesn't just have to be spatial or visual, right? There's an auditory dimension, too. Pauline Oliveros' practice of deep listening.
Tell us about that.
Oliveros was a musician and composer, and she developed this practice she defined as listening in every possible way to everything possible to hear no matter what you are doing. She made this crucial distinction between just hearing the physical perception of sound waves hitting your eardrum and listening.
Which is more active.
It's much more active. Listening is the act of giving conscious, focused attention to what you're perceiving, both acoustically and psychologically. The goal is this heightened receptivity, trying to reverse our usual habit of instantly analyzing, judging, categorizing sounds, and instead just observing them in their full complexity without immediate judgment.
That sounds almost meditative. And Odell connects this to her experience with birds, right? Bird watching, or as she prefers, bird noticing.
Yes, it's fascinating. She realized she'd sort of been practicing deep listening without knowing it, because with birds, you can't force them to show up or perform. You have to be quiet, patient, wait, use your animal senses, be receptive.
And this changed how she heard them.
Profoundly. It transformed her perception from this kind of low-res, undifferentiated background bird sound into specific, recognizable speech. She started hearing distinct calls, different songs, alarm signals. She could identify species just by their unique sounds. She compares it to when she learned her mother actually spoke 3 Filipino languages, not just the 2 she'd always assumed. Suddenly, with focused, patient attention, what seemed like one big category diversified into many distinct, meaningful elements. The granularity changes.
It changes the granularity of your perception. I love that phrase.
It's perfect, isn't it? You start discerning patterns, individual voices, subtle variations where before there was just noise or a blur.
So as an application, maybe try practicing some deep listening in your own environment. What sounds are usually just background noise for you? The hum of the fridge, the traffic outside, the heating system, bird song, even the sound of your own breathing.
What new details emerge if you give them just a few moments of focused, patient attention without judgment? It's a discipline, but it really can change how you perceive your surroundings, revealing a richness you might have missed. And maybe even reveal something about your own internal state, too.
And these moments, whether they come from spaces or sounds, they act as interruptions, don't they? They remove us from the sphere of familiarity.
Yes. Even brief moments of stepping outside the usual flow or shifting your attention can affect how you see everyday life when you return to it. It's like hitting pause, and when you press play again, the scene looks subtly different. You see it with fresh eyes.
We talked about John Muir's accident, that forced dramatic pause that completely reoriented his life, from being obsessed with productivity in that factory
to realizing life was too short to waste on belts and saws and dedicating himself to nature. That involuntary pause in time precipitated a massive change. It wasn't planned, but it was transformative.
And Odell mentions her father's experience leaving his job too.
Right. He described how leaving that long-held role allowed him to understand himself not in relation to that world of work, but just to the world. It freed his sense of self from that narrow, work-defined context, allowing him to see his identity as something much broader, more fundamental.
So, thinking about your own life again, How could you strategically introduce maybe smaller pauses or removals into your routine? It doesn't have to be a major life event.
No, definitely not.
It could be setting aside 5 minutes of intentional quiet before you dive into work emails, or dedicating your lunch break to just observing something outside your window device-free, or intentionally leaving your phone behind for a walk.
These small acts of strategic interruption, of choosing where your attention goes, can be surprisingly powerful. They can shift your perspective, maybe reveal deeper truths about yourself, your priorities, your environment. Perhaps the question isn't just how to pause, but what unexpected insights might surface for you when you actually do.
Okay, we've journeyed through doing nothing, resistance, re-engagement. It's been quite a deep dive already. Now, let's tackle something tricky. The allure of escape, the pitfalls of retreat. Because the idea of just withdrawing completely, maybe going on a digital detox retreat, is so tempting, isn't it?
Oh, incredibly tempting. And it's marketed so aggressively as the ultimate wellness fix.
But Odell argues these escapes can often be short-sighted. Why?
Well, often they get framed as these life hacks that are ultimately designed to make you more productive when you get back to work. You unplug so you can plug back in more efficiently. Which completely misses the deeper point we've been discussing.
Which is questioning that whole productivity equation in the first place.
Exactly. It doesn't challenge the system, it just offers a temporary pressure release valve so you can keep functioning within it.
There's that story of Levi, Felix, and Camp Grounded, which started out with genuine intentions, right?
It did. Felix experienced severe tech burnout, had this personal revelation, and wanted to create a space Camp Grounded to help people find a healthier relationship with technology. You know, look at faces, not screens. Strict rules. No digital tech, no work talk, just analog stuff like letters, crafts, campfires.
That's idyllic.
It tapped into something real, that feeling that digital distraction was stealing the one life they had to live. But then, well, it got popular.
And commercialized.
And inevitably, perhaps, exploited. Camp Grounded started offering corporate retreats for big tech companies like Yelp and Airbnb. It morphed into a kind of corporate amenity like a gym or a cafeteria. The profound kernel of truth got co-opted, turned into another tool for optimizing employees, making them better cogs in the machine rather than fundamentally rethinking the machine itself.
So it became the very thing it initially sought to offer an escape from. That's deeply ironic.
It is. And this desire to escape, to find a perfect retreat or build a whole new ideal society from scratch, it's not new at all, is it?
No, history is full of examples. You've got ancient ones like Epicurus setting up his garden school back in the 4th century BC.
Right. He found city life corrupting and wanted a space for happiness through simple pleasures, friendship, and leisurely contemplation away from the hustle.
And what was radical was who he let in, right?
Absolutely. He admitted non-Greeks, slaves, women, completely against the grain of the exclusive philosophical schools of the time. Friendship was central to the whole thing.
And then you jump forward centuries, you see echoes in the 1960s communes.
Definitely. That was a huge gut reaction of a generation to a world that felt untenable. Vietnam, assassinations, environmental fears, a feeling that mainstream adulthood was a kind of trap.
So they wanted a complete break, a clean slate.
Many did. They wanted to exit time, start over, build something totally new and harmonious. But as Odell points out, they often carried these ineradicable contagions of the very system they were fleeing.
Like what?
Money problems, replicated gender roles, huge struggles with internal governance, decision-making.
Yeah.
It turns out building utopia is hard. Many just fractured and split again and again, always seeking that truly free community that seemed just out of reach. It shows how difficult, maybe impossible it is to really create a truly clean slate. The past always leaves its mark.
And some attempts at utopia went even further, trying to engineer human unpredictability right out of the equation. Hannah Arendt called this the age-old temptation to substitute design for the political process.
B.F. Skinner's novel, Walden 2, is a chilling fictional example. It imagines this community engineered for perfect harmony, where people are conditioned, essentially, so they will want to do precisely the things which are best for themselves and the community.
A kind of engineered freedom.
Exactly. Where experts and planners hold all the real power and the rules, the code, are deliberately kept a bit obscure from the members for their own good. It's a vision of humans as programmable units.
And this isn't just fiction, is it? Peter Thiel's Seasteading Institute had similar ambitions.
It really did, aiming for these autonomous floating cities outside existing laws and nations. Thiel famously said he believed the fate of our world may depend on the effort of a single person who builds or propagates the machinery of freedom that makes the world safe for capitalism.
Wow. The machinery of freedom.
It is, as Arendt observed, a direct attempt to substitute design for the political process. Why? Because design avoids the messiness, the haphazardness, and moral irresponsibility inherent in a plurality of agents. In simpler terms, it tries to escape the unpredictability of actual human beings interacting, disagreeing, forming alliances, making collective decisions. The ideal is a single, brilliant designer removing all that human friction.
But Arendt had a warning about this, didn't she? About seeking shelter where one person is master of everything.
She did. She said these escapes seek shelter in an activity where one man, isolated from all others, remains master of his doings from beginning to end. But, and this is a crucial reality check, no slate can be thus cleaned, even in the sea. Reality is stubborn.
And Thiel's seasteading. It didn't quite work out as planned, did it?
No. Ultimately, the plans faltered not just because of politics, but because of engineering realities. The sheer difficulty and cost of building and maintaining these structures in the ocean proved immense. The unpredictable forces of nature couldn't be perfectly controlled.
And even if the engineering worked, you still have the people problem.
Exactly. You can't control the real human relationships, the concerns of locals about tech colonialism, the internal disagreements. Odell points out the unrealistic absence of friend groups or pairs in Skinner's Walden. 2, it ignores the fundamental plurality, the inherent differences and unpredictable connections between real people. That plurality always spells the downfall of attempts to reduce us to machines or mechanical beings.
So the takeaway is, true transformation isn't about escaping the world.
It seems not. It's about changing our relationship to the world, the messy, unpredictable, plural world that already exists. As the artist Agnes Martin suggested, the real meaning, the real work is found in the midst of life, not in some engineered bubble outside of it.
So, for you, the listener, maybe the challenge isn't finding the perfect escape, but asking, how can you engage more fully with the inherent unpredictability, the haphazardness of human interaction right where you are? What might open up if you leaned into the messiness, rather than tried to design it away?
Okay, so if perfect escape is an illusion, what about staying put but refusing to play by the usual rules? Let's talk about the power of refusal. Odell suggests that even small disruptive acts can carve out this kind of third space outside the expected norms, a space where maybe new possibilities can emerge.
Yeah, she gives some great examples, like the performance artist Pilvi Takala, who did this piece called Trainee. She basically got an internship at a company and then just sat there silently observing, doing nothing productive in the conventional sense, but still being physically present.
How did people react?
It completely baffled her colleagues. It revealed all these unspoken rules about looking busy, about performing productivity, just by her quiet non-participation. Or think about Tom Green's old dead guy routine.
Oh, yeah, where he just lie down, stock still on a busy sidewalk. Exactly. For an uncomfortably long time. It totally disrupted the flow, made people stop and question what was going on. These acts are memorable, even legendary, precisely because they break the script of everyday expectations in such a direct, physical way.
It makes me think of Diogenes the Cynic, the ancient Greek philosopher. He was the master of this, wasn't he?
Absolutely. He didn't run off to the mountains or anything. He lived right in the midst of Athenian society, famously in a big ceramic jar sometimes, but in this permanent state of refusal.
How did he do that?
By constantly doing the opposite of what was expected. He'd challenge customs by walking backward through the marketplace, or trying to enter the theater just as everyone else was leaving, or hugging statues covered in snow in winter. His whole life was aimed at being a living refutation of the world, a gadfly, as Socrates might say.
So his answer to, will you participate, was always,
I will participate, but not as asked. It creates that third space. Odell talks about this almost magical exit to another frame of reference. It forces onlookers to stop and question their own assumptions, their own automatic behaviors.
And there's a famous literary example of this kind of refusal, too. Herman Melville's Bartleby, the Scrivener.
Ah, Bartleby. I would prefer not to.
Exactly. He doesn't say, I will not, which would be direct defiance, a clear no. His phrase, I would prefer not to, is much stranger, more unsettling.
It is. Odell points out it subtly negates the terms of the question itself. It refuses to engage on the expected yes-no axis. It creates this magical exit to another frame of reference.
And the lawyer employing him is just completely thrown by it, turned into a pillar of salt, thunderstruck.
Right. It shows how Bartleby carves out a kind of foreign language within language, making the whole system confront this impenetrable silence, this polite but absolute non-cooperation. It's a next-level refusal that reveals the cracks in our habitual ways of interacting. The expected script just grinds to a halt.
But inhabiting this third space, consistently refusing the expected answer, it takes real effort, doesn't it? Odell uses the Latin. Voluntate, studio, disciplina.
Will, effort, and discipline. Yes. It's not passive. Think about the performance artist touching Shea. His year-long pieces were feats of incredible endurance and discipline, like the cage piece, living in a tiny cage for a full year, no talking, reading, writing.
Just to see what would happen.
Just to see what would happen if he emptied everything out, or punching a time clock every single hour for a year, or staying outdoors for a year. These are extreme examples of deliberate living, pushing the boundaries of will and discipline.
It reminds me of Thoreau again. Going to Walden Pond, he didn't go there to just chill out, did he?
No, he went to live deliberately, as he famously wrote, to suck out all the marrow of life, to reduce life to its lowest terms, so he could understand what was truly essential. It was an ascent to a clearer perspective, and that requires immense effort, immense willpower, not just lazy idleness.
So for you, the listener, thinking about application, where in your own life could you practice this kind of discipline of will? Maybe not a year in a cage.
Hopefully not.
But maybe it's pausing before automatically saying yes to every request, or choosing to disengage from an online argument that's going nowhere productive. How can you respond in a way that subtly undermines the authority of the hegemonic game, those dominant, often unquestioned rules, without necessarily needing a big confrontation? What does it mean for you, personally, to live deliberately, even in small ways, to focus on the marrow?
And these individual acts, they can build momentum, right? They can pave the way for collective action, for collective refusal. The 1934 San Francisco general strike is a powerful historical example of this third space organizing.
Tell us about that. What were the conditions?
Longshoremen on the docks faced really brutal conditions. Things like the shape-up, where foremen would just pick workers for the day from a crowd, leading to insecurity, corruption, favoritism, and constant speed-ups being forced to load ships at dangerous, unsustainable rates. There was this simmering resentment.
And something sparked it into action.
An anonymous mimeographed newspaper called The Waterfront Worker started circulating. It put frank language, as Odell says, to their shared anger, articulating their grievances collectively. It gave voice to what many were feeling individually. That was a crucial first step.
And then came the union, the International Longshoremen's Association, ILA.
Yes, and it was remarkably inclusive for its time, racially integrated, democratic. This collective structure allowed them to organize effectively, to proceed with arrangements for the strike, while the employers were still trying to negotiate separately, trying to divide them, stuck in what proved to be unproductive negotiations.
The coordination sounds incredible. Soup kitchens, auxiliary groups.
It was amazing. They set up soup kitchens, feeding thousands daily. A ladies' auxiliary handled relief efforts. They even had their own waterfront police force to maintain order and protect the picket lines. This disciplined, collective refusal, rooted in shared purpose and sustained by immense effort, transformed their individual problems into a unified, powerful movement. It was a collective, I would prefer not to, that literally changed labor history on the West Coast.
But there's a cost to refusal, isn't there? Odell talks about needing a margin.
Yes, absolutely. Refusal requires having the ability to afford the consequences, whether they're financial or social. Think about Rosa Parks. Her courageous act is iconic, but personally, it nearly ruined her financially. She struggled to find steady work for a decade afterwards. The cost was immense.
Which helps explain why students are often at the forefront of movements, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like the Greensboro sit-ins in the 60s or the Parkland students advocating for gun control more recently. Students often have less direct economic investment in the status quo and maybe more institutional support, like a university structure, even if temporary, than working adults with mortgages and families. They often have a slightly wider margin of refusal. Bartleby, remember, had no margin, no safety net. He refused, and he ended up dying in prison. It highlights the vulnerability involved.
And this feels incredibly relevant today. Odell talks about the new contract between companies and employees.
where economic risk gets shifted more and more onto the individual. This whole narrative that we're all capitalists now, responsible for our own destiny, our own gig work, our own brand.
It blurs the lines between work and life.
Completely dissolve them. Every waking moment becomes potentially monetizable. There's suddenly no return on investment for just doing nothing. You see in those awful Fiverr ads celebrating sleep deprivation as a sign you're a doer. Or in things like the result-only work environment, ROW model, where literally any place can become your work environment. It makes rest feel like failure, like you're falling behind. Even relatively secure white-collar workers fear getting fired, fear the pink slips if they dare protest oppressive workloads. Why? Because their margin of refusal, their safety net, feels like it's shrinking or disappearing altogether.
It creates this pervasive fear, this economic tightrope walking that makes active resistance incredibly difficult.
It does. And in this world where our financial margin feels so precarious, Odell makes a powerful argument. Maybe attention may be the last resource we have left to withdraw.
Our attention itself is the final frontier of refusal.
Potentially. She says if you have any margin at all, even the tiniest one, it's crucial to try and put it to use in opening up margins further down the line for yourself and others. This means consciously, strategically withdrawing your attention from the forces trying to capture and commodify it. The endless feed, the constant notifications, the pressure to always be performing, always be on.
And directing it elsewhere.
And directing it instead towards what truly matters, what's local, tangible, human. Is a quiet act of subversion, perhaps, but potentially a deeply powerful one, especially if done collectively. It really forces the question, what are you truly paying attention to? And why? And whose interests does that attention serve?
Okay, let's shift focus now to how all this plays out in our online world, in our digital connections, and maybe how we could reimagine them. Have you ever noticed how information online often feels weirdly out of context, almost jarring sometimes?
Oh, definitely. Academics have a term for this. Context collapse.
Context collapse. What does that mean exactly?
It's where all your different social worlds, your close friends, your family, your colleagues, maybe your boss, complete strangers, all get merged into one large combined social situation. Think about a platform like Twitter or Facebook.
Right. You post something, and theoretically anyone could see it.
Exactly. A news headline sits right next to your cousin's baby picture, which is next to a political rant, which is next to an ad for shoes. They're all flattened into these neat rectangles, stripped of their original spatial or temporal context.
And this leads to problems.
Big problems. Odell argues this is why we see those waves of hating, shaming, and vindictive public opinion online. Old posts get dug up and represented years later, totally out of their original context, leading to instant knee-jerk reactions.
Because the audience is collapsed, the nuance is lost.
Precisely. And it creates this pressure towards the lowest common denominator philosophy of sharing.
Yeah.
You end up limiting yourself to topics that feel safe for all potential readers, which often means either bland platitudes or, ironically, performative outrage, because only the most generic or extreme stuff seems to cut through the noise without causing unintended offense in some collapsed context. Nuance dies.
This flattening of space, this context collapse, Odell says it has a temporal cousin, too.
Yes, a kind of permanent instantaneity. Everything feels like it's happening right now. Past, present, future, all get compressed into this constant, overwhelming alarm bell of the now. It creates information overload.
Like living in an endless present moment with no sense of history or continuity.
Exactly. It's like amnesia. The order of events, which is crucial for understanding almost anything, gets lost in the flood of notifications, the endless scroll. We lose the thread.
And this affects activism too, right? People trying to create change.
Hugely. Odell notes that activists really struggle with this. They feel this relentless pressure to constantly produce content just to stay visible, just to keep the algorithm happy. Meanwhile, they sense that real dissent often gets drowned out not by overt censorship, but by the sheer excess of banal content. Noise becomes the censor.
And the speed of it all.
The speed is killer. The immediacy closes down the time needed for political elaboration. Communication becomes too fast, too quick, and too short for deep thinking, for nuanced debate, for developing long-term strategies.
So you get reactions, not relationships.
You get weak ties, as sociologists call them. Connections based on shared momentary reactions, a quick retweet, an angry emoji rather than on shared projects, deep understanding or committed sustained action. Real political work, real community building needs incubation space and incubation time. Social media, by its very design, tends to destroy both.
Okay, so given this diagnosis of context collapse and permanent instantaneity, what's the alternative? Odell asks us to imagine something radically different. A social network that was completely grounded in space and time, something you had to travel to in order to use, that worked slowly. Does anything like that exist, or has it ever?
Fascinatingly, yes. The past offers this amazing glimpse. He talks about the community memory system from 1972 in Berkeley.
1972, what was it?
It was arguably the world's first public electronic bulletin board system, a coin-operated teletype machine picture that, located in a record store.
A teletype in a record store.
Yeah. It functioned like a super bulletin board. People would go there and type out messages, posting notices, looking for musicians for bands, debating local politics, offering bagel baking lessons, all sorts of things.
And the key was its location.
The key was its grounding in physical place. The variance among the community memory terminals was based entirely on geographical location. If you wanted to know what people were talking about in that specific Berkeley neighborhood or post something for them to see, you had to physically go there and use that machine.
Wow. So it fostered genuinely local, community-driven exchange that required physical presence and, inevitably, worked much more slowly.
Exactly. It embodied a tangible connection to place and time.
Now, contrast that with something like Nextdoor today. It is neighborhood-specific, geographically bounded, but is it the same spirit?
Odell argues, not really. She critiques it as often being geared toward uppity property owners, overly focused on things like property value, reporting suspicious people, and ultimately, local interactions are harnessed to produce revenue through advertising. It's a kind of simulated public sphere using geography, but still operating within that same commercialized, attention-grabbing logic as Facebook or Twitter.
So are there better digital alternatives emerging, things that recapture some of that slowness or locality?
There are promising developments. Decentralized networks like Mastodon, for example, or local mesh networks like peoplesopen.net in Oakland, which are community-run, peer-to-peer internet infrastructures.
How are they different?
They're typically open source, not owned by a single corporation. They often offer more granular control of one's intended audience, so you can be more intentional about who sees what. And they're more resilient. They can't easily go bankrupt, get sold off, or be blocked by a central authority. They reintroduce elements of choice, intentionality, and maybe even place, allowing connections based on genuine affinity or local reality, not just algorithmic engagement optimized for profit.
Okay, so bringing it back to you, the listener, maybe take a moment to consider how your own online interactions are shaped by the design of the platforms you use. How could you consciously try to slow down your communication? Choose more intentional interactions, maybe seek out smaller, more focused online spaces, or even prioritize offline, place-based interactions that reintroduce that missing geographical and temporal context. What if your next scroll wasn't down a feed, but was actually a slow walk around your own block, just noticing? Let's think now about how deeply interconnected we really are, maybe in ways we don't always acknowledge, going beyond just human connections. Odell shares this incredibly powerful personal story, witnessing a stranger having a seizure in her local grocery store.
Yes, it's a really pivotal moment in her book.
It sounds terrifying, but also transformative. She said it shattered her usual self-centered default setting.
Right. Suddenly, the mundane grocery store, a place of routine chores, became this site of intense, raw, shared vulnerability. It became a miracle, as she put it, realizing we're all here together and we don't know why.
It peeled back the surface of everyday life.
Exactly. Revealed this profound, mysterious interconnectedness, the shared fragility of life, even among complete strangers in the most ordinary place.
It reminds me so much of David Foster Wallace's famous "This is Water" speech.
Oh, absolutely. His plea to consciously decide what to think about, what to pay attention to.
Instead of seeing other people as just obstacles in your way, the slow driver, the person blocking the aisle, he urges us to try and imagine their complex inner lives.
Right. To recognize that every single person around you has an entire life of birth, of childhood, of dreams and disappointments, of a universe of anxieties, hopes, grudges, and regrets, totally distinct from mine. He admits it's an impossibly absorbing task, maybe even requires saint-like patience sometimes.
For sure.
But it's a choice, a deliberate act of empathy, choosing to see the density of life experience folded into a single city street, rather than just seeing obstacles or background characters in your own movie.
And how does this connect to the algorithms we interact with? You mentioned earlier how they try to shape our sense of self.
Well, think about algorithmic recommendations, like Spotify's Discover Weekly or Netflix suggestions. They're convenient, sure, but Odell warns they can subtly, incrementally entomb us.
Entomb us? How?
By constantly feeding us things based on what we already like, They reinforce an ever more stable, predictable image of ourselves. Our identity becomes this consistent and recognizable pattern, primarily useful for advertising. It can limit our potential for surprise, for change, for encountering things outside our established taste profile. The algorithm confirms who it thinks you are, rather than letting you discover who you might become.
Whereas stumbling upon unexpected music on the radio or maybe meeting neighbors you have nothing obvious in common with.
That actively expands your filter bubble, challenges your assumptions, and maybe even expands your sense of self. Odell talks about a simple neighbor dinner she attended. It completely shifted her perspective, making her realize her apartment wasn't the center of things, but just one of many diverse centers on her street.
It changed her spatial and social map.
Exactly. And she says, when something goes from being an idea to a reality, you can't easily force your perception back into the narrow container it came from. Encounters with real difference, real plurality, change us. It highlights that the self isn't this fixed, bounded ego we often imagine. It's more like an unstable, shape-shifting thing determined by interactions with others, constantly being remade through encounters with the unexpected, the unfamiliar.
That's a really profound way to think about identity, not just internal, but relational, ecological. And that brings in the non-human world, too. Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about species loneliness.
Yes, that deep sense of alienation that many modern humans feel from the rest of the living world. We've lost touch, often seeing nature purely as a resource, a backdrop, rather than a community of fellow beings.
So what's the antidote? Odell emphasizes reciprocal attention.
Reciprocal attention. It's crucial. Simply learning the names of the plants and animals around you, maybe using an app like iNaturalist, or just getting a local field guide and paying closer attention is a vital first step.
Why names?
Because naming helps us perceive them not as generic objects, tree, bird, but as specific individual living bodies, capable of agency, capable perhaps of reciprocating our attentions. It shifts them from background to foreground, from resource to relative.
It expands our circle of concern.
It expands our circle of concern beyond just what's conventionally cute or beautiful to the entire complex ecosystem itself. Like the Olon elder Odell quotes, referring to the eruption of Mount St. Helens as poor thing. That conveys this deep empathy, seeing the mountain not just as rock, but as a living entity deserving of concern. This reciprocal attention, even, she notes, to our own intestinal bacteria hardly cute, is fundamentally about recognizing our deep interdependence, our shared fate. It's essential for survival.
And this interconnectedness isn't just local, is it? The idea of bioregions.
Bioregions teach us difference without boundary. The example Odell uses is atmospheric rivers carrying moisture all the way from the Philippines to bring rain to California. That water becomes our drinking water, nourishes our food. It's this tangible, undeniable proof of global ecological connection.
Our identities are fluid, not contained by neat lines on a map.
Exactly. Our very breath, the carbon atoms in our bodies, they connect us to vast cycles, distant places, deep history. It highlights this huge, largely invisible web of interdependence.
Which sounds a lot like what Audre Lorde wrote about, integrating all the parts of who I am.
Precisely. Lorde argued that externally imposed definitions, attempts to fragment us or force us into neat boxes, are destructive. Difference, she insisted, isn't a problem to be overcome, but a fund of necessary polarities that actually sparks creativity and strengthens community. A diverse community, human or ecological, with a complex web of interdependencies isn't just richer. It's fundamentally more resistant to take over, more resilient. Homogeneity is fragile.
Okay, this leads us to a really radical idea about what progress might actually look like. Odell talks about manifest dismantling. What is that?
It's a direct counterpoint to the idea of manifest destiny and the kind of progress depicted in that famous 1872 painting, American Progress.
The one with the floating goddess leading settlers west?
That's the one. Where progress means building railroads, stringing telegraph wires, farming the land basically, imposing a certain kind of civilization and technology, while trampling over nature and displacing indigenous peoples. It's progress as building over what was there.
So manifest dismantling is the opposite.
It suggests that true progress, especially now, might actually involve destruction, removal, remediation, actively dismantling the harmful structures and systems we've built.
Can you give an example?
The removal of the San Clemente Dam in California is a great one. A massive $84 million project, not to build something new, but to tear down a century-old concrete dam that was harming the river ecosystem.
And it wasn't just demolition, was it?
No, it was incredibly complex. It involved literally rebuilding miles of the riverbed from scratch, requiring unprecedented cooperation between engineers, scientists, and the Olone Esalen tribe whose ancestral lands were being restored. It was about remembering what was lost, actively working to restore connections. That's creative dismantling.
It shows that work isn't just about building new things.
Exactly. Odell says work is not only industry, but also reproduction, the work of remaking life, of restoring ecosystems. This connects beautifully to Masanobu Fukuoka's do-nothing farming, which isn't lazy, but involves working with the existing relationships in the land, minimizing intervention to let nature's own systems thrive.
And Muriel Ukelis's manifesto for maintenance art.
Yes, her declaration, my working will be the work. Recognizing that maintenance caring, cleaning, repairing, sustaining is vital, essential work, not just secondary drudgery. Manifest dismantling is about taking down not only the physical structures of exploitation, but also, as Odell says, the very language with which we conceive of progress. Shifting our focus from blind, forward-only momentum to restorative action, ethical presence, and careful maintenance.
So the final application for you, the listener, where could you identify areas for manifest dismantling in your own life or your community, or even just in your own ways of thinking? It's not about ignoring destruction, but about actively remembering what's been lost or damaged and working to restore connections, both human and non-human.
This includes, she argues, dismantling the gated communities of attention, where only the privileged seem to have the time or space for contemplation. It's about working to open up those spaces, literal or metaphorical, making restorative attention more accessible for everyone. What might you need to unbuild or unlearn, perhaps, to make space for something more vital, more connected, more just? #shag, #outro.
Wow. What a journey this deep dive has been. We started with the simple yet radical idea of doing nothing and traveled through resistance, re-engagement, context collapse, and now manifest dismantling.
It really covers a lot of ground.
It does. From that paradox of doing nothing being a potent plan to the power of resistance in place, we've really seen how consciously choosing where to put our attention, rerouting it, deepening it, can lead to these profound shifts in how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others, and really the entire world around us.
It boils down to presence, doesn't it? Choosing to be truly present right where we are.
Yeah. And we've learned or been reminded just how intricately linked our fates really are. We're connected to each other, obviously, but also to the specific places we inhabit and to every other living thing within those places.
And Odell makes it clear this isn't just some nice abstract philosophical understanding. She frames it as an urgent personal recognition. Our emotional well-being, even our physical survival, truly depends on recognizing and nurturing these connections. A life disconnected from other life, from place, it starts to feel, well, maybe not worth living. It's about deep engagement, mutual well-being.
So as you go back into your day, maybe carry this question with you. How can you cultivate what Odell calls an aimless aim? A goal, maybe, but one without a rigid telos, without that predetermined endpoint that productivity demands. How can you be more like that useless tree, providing witness, shelter, unlikely endurance, simply by being?
How can you embrace moments, places, interactions for their own intrinsic sake, not just as steps towards some other measurable outcome?
And what does it mean for you, personally, to try and stay perpendicular to the earth, don't pitch forward, don't fall back, to embrace what that Swiss curator Harold Seaman called the Hauptstrom?
That main current, right?
Yeah.
That primary stream of energy, that joyfully grasped force of life and creativity that kind of bubbles up when art and life intersect, defying those rigid categories we try to impose.
Yeah. So we invite you to continue this deep dive in your own way, to think about how you can rebuild some of the context we've lost in our fast-paced, collapsed world, and how you might foster more empathy, more responsibility, maybe even new kinds of political innovation right there in the places you are right now.